Greetings and salutations. Today we will be covering the confounding case of the disappearance of Brandon Swanson. Brandon Swanson was born on January 30th, 1989, in Marshall, Minnesota. After graduating high school in 2007, he would go on to study at the Minnesota West Community and Technical College in their Canterbury campus, studying wind turbines specifically. Here he would prove himself a studious individual, wishing to contribute to a better future. At the end of the academic year, in May 13th, 2008, Swanson and his friends decided to stay in Canterbury that evening to celebrate. They would go and celebrate at two different parties, both held in dormitories of different students. When asked, his friends commented that while he consumed alcoholic beverages, he did so in a rather conservative way, as to guarantee that he was under the legal limit due to him having to drive home later, and in no way enough to make him seem visibly intoxicated. He was noted as being sober when he left the party. This would be just after midnight when Brandon left the party. He then got into his Chevrolet Lumina and left for his 30-mile drive back home to Marshall. The drive was considered a rather simple drive, in no way needing more than 30 to 40 minutes dependent on traffic to finish. However, for some unknown reason, Brandon was still driving and in no way closer to home at around 1:45 a.m. and it would be then that his ride would stop. Brandon would proceed to call his parents, Brian and Annette, telling them that he had ended up crashing his car into a ditch from which he could not remove the car. He was not hurt and asked them to come to where he had been to pick him up. While alarming, his parents were not surprised by this incident, due to a childhood incident limiting his vision, notably his vision at night. Brian and Annette would get into their car and drive on Highway 68 in the direction where they believed Brandon had been. However, the recovery was made difficult due to not knowing where precisely he had been, as he had almost certainly taken the wrong turn during his drive. However, they kept him on the phone despite occasional hang-ups and signal drops, allowing them to stay in contact and significantly more calm. And given the area that he was in, it was not unlikely or unexpected that the signal would drop every once in a while. It was believable that he likely became confused and ended up somewhere he had never been before. Due to this, his parents suggested that he use his flashlight to signal passing cars. In hopes of being able to find him, his parents would continue to drive down Highway 68. Unfortunately, half an hour of driving and they were no closer to finding their son. They had seen neither hide nor hair of their currently missing son. It would be then that his father realized that Brandon was likely not on Highway 68. From there, he proceeded to ask his son if he could see any spotlights or any identifiers of a nearby town or locals. When he said he could see lights, his father suspected that they were in the nearby town of Lynd. This was not too far off from Marshall, meaning that it was believable that his son would have ended up around that area. Brandon could have accidentally driven off a nearby exit and wound up there. Brian told his son to walk to the town or towards it if possible, in order to have a similar heading so they could meet up either at the town or on the highway. Brandon would go on to tell his father to head for the parking lot of a local bar that they knew and wait for him there. At this point, they had been on the phone for approximately 47 minutes, and when it seemed as if the family would be promptly reunited, Annette and Brian heard something on the other end of the phone that would haunt them for years on end. Without prompting, Brandon suddenly interrupted himself and screamed, "Oh shit," as if he had been taken by surprise, before falling completely, deathly silent. In a near state of panic, the father would call his son to answer. However, he was met with nothing more but silence. Beginning to panic, thinking he had lost connection to his son, Brian hung up the phone and attempted to call again. However, there would be no answer. Brian, now fully in a panic attack, would go on to continuously call his son without pause. However, the longer it took for him to answer, the more evident became that something terrible had happened. And unable to find any clues onto what their son was going through, His parents decided to call the police and report him as missing. However, to no end of frustration, law enforcement did not seem to have as much interest in the case as the parents did, to the point that one of the officers supposedly told them that it was hardly unusual for young men of that age to stay out all night after a last day of college. Man, that person's cold and heartless. While another seemed to imply that the parents were being controlling, and the initial response of the Lynd Police Department was to say that their son had a right to be missing, and they had refused to investigate until it had been at least 24 hours since the last contact. Due to this, Brandon's parents were forced to take their case directly to the chief of police, and after vigorously making said case, a search party was formed, which took a few hours. The authorities would find Brandon's abandoned vehicle lying in a ditch, just as described, and well, there were no signs of foul play at that point. There were also no signs of Brandon, sadly. After searching his phone records, it was revealed that at one point, Brandon had been calling from the vicinity of Tarleton along State Highway 68, the main route to Canterbury, northwest of Marshall. It was eventually found that his cell phone call had been routed through a tower at the intersection of County Routes 3 and 10 near Minnesota, another town along Highway 68. By May 15th, the call had been determined to have come from within 5 miles of the tower. Searchers were concentrating their efforts in this area, since part of the circle included Yellow Medicine County. To the north, authorities from that jurisdiction would also take part in the search. Brandon's phone would eventually be tracked down to Yellow Medicine County proper. Multiple search and rescue teams would eventually be dispatched, including but not limited to teams using bloodhounds, helicopters, and ATVs, who each would scour the area and search for any signs of Brandon. Later that day, one of the search dogs would pick up the scent, and search and rescue personnel would be sent to follow. The dog would go on for about 3 miles and cut through nearby fields, ending in an abandoned farm. From there, the dog would follow the trail to the Yellow Medicine River, where any trace of Brandon up and disappeared. Brandon's father confirmed that he had heard running water from the other end of the phone, and this would cause authorities to begin to suspect that Brandon had fallen into the river and drowned. Divers and search crews went through the river, combing it with a fine-tooth comb, and they would find absolutely no trace of him. Unfortunately, a week after the search, most of the search and rescue efforts were discontinued. However, Sheriff Vizky continued to walk 2 miles of the Yellow Medicine River and the area around it personally for the following 30 days. Now, seeing how long he had been missing, the chances of survival were seen as slim to none. No thanks to the police department essentially saying, "Oh no, we'll look for him later." However, despite all this, Brandon's parents would not give up hope. The Swansons would leave their porch light on all night, every night, as a symbol of their hope that Brandon would eventually return or be found safely. By autumn of 2008, there had been a newly organized search and rescue effort, focusing on the freshly harvested fields along Highway 68. One of the major roadblocks in their original search was the veritable oceans of corn and wheat fields that stood in their way. The majority of the hindrance now gone allowed the sheriff to believe wholeheartedly that they had a chance to search successfully and come up with something, anything really. Almost immediately, cadaver dogs on one of the searches began to follow the scent of human remains into an area of northwest Potter that had not been searched earlier. Once more, no physical evidence would be found, yet the scent had been picked up in the area, and this area was heavily laden with farming equipment, leading some to believe that Brandon's body may have been eviscerated by a harvester or some type of other heavy equipment. By the spring of 2011, 122 square miles had been scoured. However, despite this Herculean effort, not a singular clue or lead had been found. It was almost as if Brandon had been swallowed up by the earth and vanished, never to be seen again. As far as theories goes, there's few, if any, believers about the theory of Brandon having drowned. And while the trail followed by one of the dogs led to the Yellow Medicine River, and despite her son's last known words Annette Swanson does not believe that he drowned there, because after following the scent to the water, the dog continued up across the other side, along that riverbank, up onto another gravel road, where it continued northwards towards the yellow Madison County line and ended right there. There really is nothing to indicate that he's in the river, she told CNN. His father also seems to note that his son did not seem disoriented or intoxicated in any way, making drowning an even smaller possibility. He and his parents were well known to have a close and loving relationship, to the point that the first thing he did when in a pinch was call them. And even if we were to consider that he ran away, there would have been more than likely a number of sightings of him in the area due to the heavy amounts of searching and focus on him that there was at the time. Vizecki had said that there could not be any ruling out of foul play, even if there was no direct evidence of it, going so far as to state someone could have been in the shadows, and they got him that way. This is based on the fact that in his opinion, Brandon's last words, being a singular, terrified utterance of an expletive, told him everything he needed to know. Now the question that remains is, who are the they that were referenced by the chief? This has led some to believe that Brandon had been a victim of a potential serial killer or an opportunistic killer on Highway 68, due to Highway 68 being a very highly traveled road for both regular drivers and truckers. It is not outside the realm of possibility that Brandon was picked up by someone and driven off to somewhere else in the yellow Madison County area, only to be slain and disposed of somewhere else in a way that would leave no traces. However, if we consider that, we must also consider the possibility that rather than someone attempting to end him, Brandon's utterance was instead due to someone who had the intent of keeping the young man for other reasons and purposes, for anything from sadistic torture to human trafficking. Even the possibility of something as silly as being along the lines of a Children of the Corn situation comes to mind. Due to his disappearance and the issues with the investigation, eventually Brandon's law would be passed. In essence, the law stated that the police were no longer allowed to refuse a report based on an initial belief that there was no criminal activity involved. The brevity of the interval since the last time the person was seen, or the possibility that the person may have intentionally disappeared, or even the lack of a relationship between a missing person and the reporter. Unfortunately for the family and all those involved, including Brandon, this law will do little to help solve the mystery of his disappearance. If you have remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.